Welcome back to Zen Sleep Stories. You made it through another day. You survived. That's enough. In this quiet little inn, every night I tell bedtime tales. Stories from old Japan. The meaning of each story changes, depending on who is listening. So now, let your thoughts rest. Just lie back and breathe. Tonight's story is about a good man facing the real human struggle before stealing for the first time. The setting is Kyoto, devastated by storms, famine, and fire. All he had left was reason, but hunger was louder. Today as well, prices keep rising. Politics feel unstable. If you stood in his place, what would you do? Rashomon. Ryunosuke Akutagawa. Under the vast archway of the Rashōmon Gate, in the dimming light of a rainy evening, a lone servant sat waiting for the rain to stop. The gate was wide and solemn, but empty, except for a single cricket perched on one of the great vermilion pillars, its paint peeling away with age. Considering that this was the grand southern gate of Suzaku Avenue, one might expect a few others to have taken shelter here, a woman, perhaps, or a weary traveler. But no one came. The servant was alone. For years now, Kyoto had suffered earthquakes, wild winds, fires, and famine had descended upon the city one after another. The capital, once thriving, had fallen into ruin. Old records tell of people dismantling Buddhist statues and sacred furnishings, stripping them of their gold leaf and vermilion lacquer, and piling the wood by the roadside to sell as firewood. If that was the state of the city's center, it was no surprise that no one had spared a thought for the upkeep of Rashomon. In time, the gate had become desolate. Foxes and raccoons made it their home. Thieves hid in its shadows. And in the end, it became a place where the dead, unclaimed, and unwanted were abandoned. As dusk deepened, the gate grew ominous. People feared it. No one dared approach once the light had faded. Instead, crows gathered. During the day, they circled the roof in dark, sweeping arcs, crying out as they flew over the gate's weathered tiles. At sunset, against a sky dyed red, the birds looked like scattered sesame seeds in the glowing light. They came, of course, for the flesh of the corpses left atop the gate. But tonight, perhaps because the hour was late, not a single bird could be seen. Only the white droppings they had left behind, dotted along the mossy stone steps, some of which had begun to crumble, with long grasses sprouting from the cracks. The servant sat heavily on the topmost of the 7 steps, the worn indigo of his kimono brushing the stone beneath him. He absently touched the swollen pimple on his right cheek and stared out at the rain. Earlier, it was said that he was waiting for the rain to stop. But in truth, the man had nowhere to go, even if it did. On an ordinary day, he would have returned to his master's house. But 4 or 5 days ago, he had been dismissed, let go without ceremony. As mentioned, the capital had declined. His master's decision to cast him out was just another sign of the times. So, rather than say he was waiting for the rain to stop, it would be more accurate to say he was trapped beneath the gate with no place to go, no hope to cling to, just a man soaked in uncertainty. Even the weather seemed to press down on him. The rain had begun around the hour of the monkey and showed no signs of letting up. It seemed determined to wash the world clean. The man tried, above all, to think of how he might survive the next day. Or rather, how to make the impossible possible. And so, lost in his formless thoughts, he sat beneath the rain, listening without listening to its ceaseless rhythm on the avenue of Suzaku. The rain wrapped itself around the gate, drawing with it a distant, murmuring roar. Twilight pulled the sky lower and lower, until the roof's jutting tiles seemed to press against heavy, dim clouds. To make the impossible possible, one could not afford to be selective. If he tried to cling to decency, he'd end up starving beneath some wall or on the dirt by the roadside. And in the end, he'd be carried here, abandoned atop this gate, no different from the others, thrown away like a dog. If one were not to choose. That thought, circling endlessly in his mind, had finally reached its conclusion. But if one were not to choose, remained just that, a thought, a condition, an idea, not a decision. The servant understood in his head what it meant, but his heart could not yet fully embrace the next step. That if he were to stop choosing, he would have to become a thief. A loud sneeze broke from him. He rose, slowly and reluctantly. Kyoto's chill had deepened. The kind of cold that made you long for a fireball. Wind moved freely between the columns of the gate, rushing through without hesitation. The cricket on the beller had vanished. He hunched his shoulders, the indigo cloth of his kimono pulled tighter over the yellow underrobe, stained with old sweat. He glanced around, searching for any corner where he could avoid the rain and wind. Somewhere hidden enough to sleep undisturbed for the night. By chance, he spotted a wide vermilion painted ladder leading up to the gate's upper chamber. Even if someone was up there, he reasoned, they would be corpses. Careful not to let the sword at his hip slip from its sheath, he placed his straw-sandaled foot on the bottom rung and began to climb. Some time passed. Halfway up the broad ladder that led to the upper level of Rashomon, the servant crouched like a cat. He held his breath, straining to catch any sound above. A faint yellow glow filtered down from the loft. It gently lit his right cheek, where a large, inflamed pimple shone through the sparse stubble on his jaw. He had assumed there would be only the dead above. But after climbing just a few rungs, he realized that someone was moving a light around up there. Its dusky hue flickered across the cobweb-covered rafters, dancing in the corners of the ceiling. To light a flame here, on a stormy night like this, atop a forgotten gate. This could be no ordinary person. Creeping like a gecko, he silenced his footsteps. He pulled himself slowly upward, pressing his body close to the wood. When he finally reached the top rung, he pushed his head forward, keeping his body low. Then, cautiously, he peered inside. Inside the upper chamber, just as the rumors had said, several bodies lay strewn carelessly across the floor. The flickering flame did not reach far, and their number was unclear. Still, he could make out that some were naked, others clothed. There were men and women among them. And yet, they hardly looked like people who had once lived. Their mouths hung open. Their arms stretched stiffly, awkwardly. They looked more like dolls fashioned from clay, abandoned, forgotten. The flicker of fire touched raised shoulders and chests, casting shadows deep into the hollows of their bodies. They lay in silence, as if they had never spoken a word in life, and never would again. A stench rose from them. The servant instinctively covered his nose. But within moments, he forgot he had done so. Something stronger had overtaken him, a feeling that dulled even the sense of smell. Then, for the first time, his eyes found movement. Among the dead, someone crouched. A woman, small, hunched, thin. Her hair white, her back bent. She wore a dull reddish-brown robe. She looked almost like a monkey. In her right hand, she held a splinter of pine lit with fire. She stared closely at one of the bodies, unmoving. It was likely a woman. The long black hair suggested as much. A strange mix of fear and curiosity froze the servant in place. He could not breathe. This was the sensation the old texts spoke of. When the hair stands on end, when death brushes close. Then the old woman pressed her flaming pine stick between two floorboards to fix it in place. She leaned over the body and placed both hands around the dead woman's head. Like a mother monkey grooming her young, she began to pull out the long hair, one strand at a time. The hair came away easily. Her hands moved with practiced calm. With each hair pulled, the servant's fear slipped further from him, and in its place something darker began to rise. hatred. Not toward the woman exactly, but toward something deeper, toward the very idea of evil itself. Had someone at that very moment asked him again, "Would you rather starve or become a thief?" he would have answered without hesitation, "Let me starve." So fiercely did his heart burn with rage. As fiercely as the pine splinter she had driven into the floor. The servant didn't understand why she was pulling the hair from the dead. So he couldn't say whether it was good or evil. But to him, here and now, in the rain-drenched dark atop Rashomon, what she was doing, plucking hair from a corpse, seemed nothing short of wicked. Of course, by this point, he had entirely forgotten that not long ago he himself had been contemplating death. Suddenly, he pushed off the ladder and sprang into the room. His feet struck the floor with a thud. He reached for the hilt of his sword and strode toward the old woman with wide, heavy steps. Goes without saying, she was terrified. The moment she saw him, she leapt up like a bowstring snapping. "Where do you think you're going, old woman?" The servant barked at her, blocking her escape as she stumbled over the dead. She tried to shove past him, but he pushed her back. In silence, the two of them wrestled there among the corpses. But the outcome had never been in question. At last, he grabbed her bony arm, thin as a chicken leg, and slammed her to the floor. "What were you doing? Speak. If you don't, I'll..." He shoved her away and drew the blade from its sheath. The steel glinted cold and white as he held it before her face. She said nothing. Her shoulders trembled. Her breath came in gasps. Her wide, unblinking eyes seemed frozen in place. And seeing her like that, he realized, truly realized, that her life now rested entirely in his hands. That understanding doused the fire of his anger. The rage that had surged within him a moment ago faded without a trace. What remained was a curious calm, quiet satisfaction, like the stillness that comes after a task is complete. He looked down at her and spoke, his voice gentler now. I'm no city official, no enforcer of the law. Just a traveler who happened to pass by. I have no intention of binding or arresting you. Just tell me, what were you doing up here at this hour, in this place? At his words, the old woman's eyes grew even wider. She stared at him, unblinking. From beneath her reddened, swollen eyelids, a sharp glint flashed, like the gaze of a bird of prey. Her lips, nearly lost in the folds of her wrinkled face, began to move as if chewing on something. Her skinny neck twitched with each breath, and the pointed knot of her throat bobbed up and down. Then from her throat came a voice, dry and hoarse, like the cry of a crow caught in smoke. I was pulling the hair. That hair to make a wig. The servant felt strangely disappointed. There was something too mundane in her answer. With that disappointment came a cold, contemptuous pity. And then, as if summoned back, his earlier hatred began to return. It seemed the old woman sensed it too. Still clutching the strands she had pulled from the dead woman's head, she began to mutter, her voice thick and muffled, like the croak of a frog. Yes, taking hair from the dead. It might sound cruel, but listen, these corpses here, they were the kind of people who, well, no one would blame me for doing as I did. That woman, the one whose hair I was pulling, she used to cut snakes into short lengths, dry them, and sell them as dried fish. She sold them to the soldiers in the barracks, told them they were real. If not for the plague, she'd still be doing it today. And the thing is, those soldiers loved them. Said they tasted good, kept buying them. I don't think what she did was wrong. What else could she do? If she didn't she would have starved. Same with me. What I'm doing now, it's the same. If I didn't do this, I'd be dead too. That woman knew how it was. She would have understood. She would have forgiven me. This was more or less what the old woman said. He listened with a cold, unreadable expression. His left hand rested on the hilt of his sword, and with his right, he absently touched the large red pimple on his cheek. But as the woman spoke, something began to stir inside him. A kind of courage. It was the very courage he had lacked earlier, when he sat beneath the gate, paralyzed by indecision. But it wasn't the same kind of courage he had felt when storming up the ladder and confronting the old woman. This was different. He pointed in the opposite direction. Now he no longer wavered. No longer questioned whether he should starve or steal. In fact, the thought of starving no longer even crossed his mind. It had been pushed far beyond the edge of his awareness. "Is that so?" he muttered, voice low and mocking. Then, taking one step forward, he suddenly dropped his hand from his cheek and grabbed the old woman by the collar. His voice turned sharp, biting. "Then you won't mind if I strip you bare. After all, I'd starve otherwise." With swift hands, he tore the robe from her body. As she reached to cling to him, he shoved her backward. She fell, robe torn away, across the scattered bodies. The ladder stood just 5 steps away. Clutching the reddish-brown robe under one arm, the servant turned and dashed down the steep steps into the night. For a long while, the old woman lay there as if dead. Eventually, she stirred. Still among the corpses, she raised her naked frame. Groaning softly, muttering to herself, she crawled across the floor toward the ladder, guided only by the dim, dying light of the pine torch. and there, with her short white hair hanging down like a veil, she peered over the edge of the gate, down into the world below. All she saw was a deep, endless darkness. No one knew where the servant had gone. Afterward, this story follows a structure typical of Japanese literature. Never tells us what happened to the servant after. In Japan, this question, what became of him after that, is often a topic of discussion. Realistically, what do you think happened to him? Did he come to regret his actions? Or perhaps, if you found this tale enjoyable, subscribing to the channel and leaving a like would greatly encourage this old storyteller. You have done well today. Rest easy and sleep well. Good night.